Welcome back to What, Why, God. And today we have with us Grant Wright. He is our outreach and missions minister. And I went to him and asked him a question, or sent him the questions, and had him look those over. And he decided he was going to do There's Nothing That Proves Christianity. And I kind of looked at him and he laughed about it, or I laughed about it. I'm like, really? That's the one? And I thought about it, and I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. You're the missions guy. You're used to doing this. Yeah, there's a lot that proves Christianity.
There's a lot out there. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so we were talking a little bit about that, and you talked a little bit about the three pillars and what that is for people to just kind of settle on some three pillars when they're talking about what proves Christianity.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about three different things. One will be the reliability of the scriptures. That's obviously paramount when we're talking about Christianity in the Bible, is the reliability of the Bible. Can we trust it?
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest attacks. It has been from the beginning of Christianity even to today. It's still under attack. But the second one is archaeology, and there is so much that has been brought to light over the last probably 150, 160 years as we've started excavating Israel, learning so much more. And in fact, archaeology is referred to as the fifth gospel because it just brings the text to light. They say it illuminates the stories as we learn about the material culture.
Yeah.
And the last thing we'll talk about briefly is just personal experience and looking at lives that have been changed, that people have interacted or encountered Jesus.
And we've seen that as kind of a recurring theme because it almost feels like anytime you have any of these questions, you have to kind of bring in a little bit of your own personal experience and maybe personal experiences that you see within the Bible too. So there's always going to be that element when you're talking to somebody, because if you know it to be true, they want to hear how it's affected you. So I love that. Okay, so you talked a little bit about the archaeology, and that's your reliability of the text, but you also talked about there is a plethora of information, and you have a chart that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the reliability of the scriptures, there's really three things that you're looking at, and one is the date of the manuscripts, when is it written? Two is the number of copies that you have, and then when you have numerous copies, what is the accuracy or the variance between those different copies? And we've got a chart. We'll plug this up so you can see it, or put it in the footnotes so you can check it out. But this is a great chart to reference. It's got historical documents. It's got categories for those categories I just mentioned, and how many copies that have been found. And so, when we're looking at these texts, the Bible is heavily scrutinized. You could even say it is guilty until proven is innocent.
Yeah, very true.
And that's a very common thing when it comes to skeptics. And so, when you're looking at these, we'll just take Homer, for example. Homer wrote the Iliad in 800 BC. There was about a 400-year gap until we find the first manuscript. And then today we've got over 1,800 copies. So that's a document that there's not dispute over historical accuracy. Has it been corrupted? Has it been changed?
They're not sure who wrote it, I understand. They're not 100% sure who wrote the whole thing, but
the accuracy and the reliability is not really disputed. But it comes to the Bible, heavily disputed. But you look at the New Testament, you've got documents that are written within the first 50 years of Jesus' life and death. And again, you look at that time period, and there's not enough time there for it to be corrupted or changed, because you still have eyewitnesses that are living that could say, no, that's not true. You have the living accountability.
And you have the Dead Sea Scrolls for the Old Testament, so you guys should look that up too.
Absolutely.
And you have, like, what did you say, about 42,000 documents?
Yeah, for the Old Testament, it's 42,000 documents, which is
confirming it.
Absolutely unbelievable. And so what the Dead Sea Scrolls did was it brought our timeline from about 1000 AD back to 1st century AD BC documents. So it closed a 1,000-year gap of reliability of bringing it back to the source. And before that time period, people would say, well, there's been 1,000 years between this time, the documents have been changed. They've been corrupted. And what we know, I mean, we can go back to the Essene community that lived there at Qumran where these documents were found. Many of the whole scrolls, including Isaiah, have been found there. They've been able to go back and look at the variances that were there. And what's really amazing, you know, if you're looking at the New Testament, there's only about a 3% variance from over 10,000 documents that have been found. And when you're looking at the variances, you're really talking about capital letters, punctuation,
articles,
maybe,
I've heard, maybe the,
articles,
or something like that.
Or maybe a word that's not there, that it's implied, but very small things. But all that to say, if you took all those variances out of the New Testament, there would be zero teachings that would influence the Christian faith and what we believe, what we teach. It all stays the same. So the reliability of the text is there. The documentation is there. The number of copies, it's really overwhelming. It's the best historical document, well documented.
Which actually gets us into your next point, which is archaeology, because I know a lot of archaeologists, even non-Christian archaeologists, will use the Bible when they're in that general vicinity or area to confirm certain things. Because we have names of people outside of the Bible that are in that. So tell us a little bit about the archaeology.
Yeah, archaeology is fascinating. Again, it's a newer discipline that's come in, but it has revealed so much. And again, it doesn't prove that the Bible is true. I don't think we need that, but it brings it to life, and it shows that the material culture that we're reading about in the scriptures line up with what we're finding in Israel. And so
give us an example. You were just going to say, I cut you off, sorry. You just went on a trip, right?
Yeah, I was able to go to Israel last year. It was a fantastic trip I got to do with my daughter, and we actually got to go dig with Dr. Stripling and his crew out at ancient Shiloh, which is where Joshua brought the tabernacle and sat the tabernacle up. It's where Hannah would have come and prayed. It's where Samuel would have grown up. And I mean, just incredible history that happened there at ancient Shiloh. But you walk around, and one of the unique experiences I had was being with Dr. Stripling. He's actually the leading world archaeologist in Joshua conquest cities. And so, you know, I've read the Old Testament, I've gone through, I've read these names of these different places, these cities, these kings, but for the first time, as I'm walking the land of the Bible, and I'm with Dr. Stripling, and I'm visiting these places, they're coming to life. It's like, wait a second, that's a real city. That was a real king. This was a real conquest. This was a real battle. I can see the destruction layer. I can see the walls that came down. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable how it all comes to life. And archaeology is a reminder to us that these are real people, these are real places, and they're real events. And I would say some of the biggest findings that we've had as far as Christianity and the discoveries there, the James ossuary is probably one of the top finds. So James, the brother of Jesus, his ossuary, which is a bone box, was found. And this is a box that is made out of Jerusalem limestone and is inscribed in the box 7 words. And it reads, James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. And so in this ossuary, they found over 1,000 ossuaries. About 25% of them have text written on them. So text isn't a common thing, but it's not unusual. But definitely to have a brother written on it would be unusual. If there's a relative, it would be their son. They are very famous to have a brother. So very well known. But this is a massive finding. It's the only first century artifact that has Jesus' name written on it. And it's also an artifact that most scholars agree is an authentic artifact. And you could go to the museum in Israel, and you can see it today.
You can see it, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But there's other ossuaries. There's even Caiaphas's ossuary that's very ornate and elegant, as you might expect Caiaphas's to be.
Yeah. We'll put a lot of these kinds of links so you can find out about them too. He's got tons of stories, and we don't have a lot of time for all of them, but it is remarkable, which is one of the reasons why I thought that was a really great point to make. There's just so much evidence. The text reliability, the archaeology, and now let's talk a little about the personal experiences.
Yeah. So, I think a few key ones to note. First would be Paul. I mean, you have a guy that is kind of at the top of his world, has no reason to change, but yet he is even persecuting and killing Christians. Yet he has this encounter with Jesus after he has died, the resurrected Jesus, and completely changes his lifestyle. His calling changes, who he hangs around with, how he lives his life, and even giving his life changes. And coming back to the brother of Jesus. So I love Gary Habermas, who's a scholar on the resurrection. He loves to ask people, what would it take for you to believe your brother was the Messiah? So Terry, what would it take for you to believe?
Well, I will tell you, my brothers often say, well, my word reigns. And they're my younger brothers. I'm kidding.
So yeah, take that into perspective. But that's an interesting question to ponder on as you think about this. But this is even an outside of the Bible documentation where you have Josephus, who's a historian, who writes about James.
Right.
And says that he was crucified believing that his brother Jesus was the Messiah. So again, an outside biblical source talking about Jesus, talking about James, and talking about his dying of his faith.
Because the evidence of that personal experience is not, it's in the Bible, but now it's being recorded by somebody who's not a Christian, who is just kind of telling his own story, and oh, by the way, blah, 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 and he says this sort of stuff. So that's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. So fascinating to track those things. And even if you just step back and took the disciples as a whole, you have looking at the resurrection, because at the end of the day, the evidence for Christianity is overwhelming. But at the end of the day, there's also the question of, did he raise from the grave? Mm-hmm. That's the pinnacle question.
That is the pinnacle question.
And so when we look at the life of the disciples, you see them coming up to the Friday where he's hanging on the cross and he dies. The Saturday, they're
hiding.
Scared, they're hiding, they're running, because their Messiah was a failure.
Yeah, they thought he was going to come with a sword.
Yeah, he was supposed to conquer, kill the Romans, maybe even the emperor, but he failed. He died. That is not the way they would have written the story. That's not the way they understood the prophecies.
Yeah, and if you read the Bible, you can see how they completely misunderstand Jesus the entire way. But
And so you see that on Saturday, and then there's Sunday morning. Sunday morning's the resurrection. Sunday morning's the game changer. Sunday the morning, those disciples live for Jesus like he is the resurrected Messiah, and they die for their faith.
And they all died.
Absolutely. So the disciples died for their faith, believing that Jesus was the resurrected Lord. And so again, this idea of personal experience and encounter with Jesus is evidence and proof for he is alive.
Right.
And I would even say for myself, my experience with God and with Jesus has absolutely changed who I am.
Yeah.
There was a time before that experience that I knew about God, I knew about Jesus, but I didn't live 100% like they were real.
Right.
But after that experience, 100% has changed my life calling, how I live, what I live for. And I think those are pillars as we think about the evidence for Christianity, the authenticity, the reliability of the Scriptures, the fifth gospel of archaeology and it illuminating the text, bringing that to life, and then the personal experiences of the disciples, of Paul, of Christians today.
Yeah, I love it. And like I said, we'll put all this information in our description, and there's just a plethora of information. And so don't try to take it and attack it all if somebody asks you that. Certainly have a few little things in your pocket, and I think you've given us those, and I appreciate that. And then you can certainly start a longer conversation with somebody about that too. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Grant. And if you have a question, you can send it to online at firstcolonychurch.org. And you can also look in our description, as I mentioned, for all the information. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks, Grant. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.